Hey guys, I know it's been a while since we posted a video, but there's a reason for that, and that's because we didn't have access to Elvin Ray for a few months because of an engine issue. But that issue's been resolved. We're back at it. We're on the water, and I wanted to talk about our anchor and how we went about replacing the factory anchor that came with our R-23 and what we replaced it with, why we replaced it, and what I think is the great solution for anchoring with your R-23 specifically. So hang with us and let's cue the music.
So as you guys know, we love our Ranger tug. We spent 50 nights on our boat in the first 100 nights that we owned her. And we enjoy being on the boat. We enjoy cruising on the boat, but we enjoy just anchoring and being on the boat out on a coastal waterway or in a local lake, just off the beaten path. And we want to do more of that. First 50 nights we were there, most of those were at marinas, and most of our nights overall have been at marinas. But we've wanted to do more anchoring beyond just anchoring out for a daytime lunch or to spend some time getting in the water, cooling off, those kind of things. So anchoring has become kind of a priority for us in fixing on the Ranger tug. Now, the anchor that comes with the Ranger tug, the Lumark Hostile anchor, is very serviceable. The 50 feet of chain, 200 feet of rope, the whole package is a pretty good package. And the setup that Ranger Tugs has put on the R-23, I think is pretty close to ideal because there's plenty of room between the winch and the bow roller to secure the anchor, to that be able to move and repair any chain lockups or hiccups with the windlass. So I really like the setup, but really there was a couple of things that early on I just knew we were going to have to address. The first thing we had to address was the way the chain was marking up the fiberglass right behind the bow roller. And if you'll see the picture here, it's kind of hard to tell, but there's significant amount of rubbing that goes on right behind the stock bow roller on the R-23. And we found that, cleaning that or constantly polishing that wasn't worth the time. So I got what was called chafe guard, a little metal, thin metal piece of self-adhesive chafe guard, cut that down to size, and applied that over that curve and protected that area where the anchor was actually contacting the fiberglass of the deck. And that solved that problem right off the bat. And so we really thought that was one of the best things we'd done early on with anchoring. But the other thing that we really had to fix early on was the fact that there was no anchor swivel. And the first couple of times you draw the anchor up, and it does about 6 rotations as it's pulling into the bow roller, you'll understand why a swivel is very important. The swivel that we decided to go with was the Mantis swivel. It had great reviews. It's very robust. And it took a little bit of doing to actually make it work with the small anchor that we had. But that swivel has been a great addition, just making anchoring effortless as far as twists in the line or twists in the chain developing as you swing or as you pull the anchor up and it kind of turns and spirals coming out of the water. It eliminates all that, makes the whole anchoring process from dropping the anchor to bringing it back up very easy. And so the anchor swivel has been a great addition for us. That's the first real investment we made in our ground tackle. So when we're anchoring out, if it's going to be anything longer than a lunch on a calm lake or anything where any kind of currents involved, anything that would put stress on the windlass, we always manufacture a bridle out of a couple of dock lines. You can use dock lines to bring your bow line up a few feet and take that stress off the windlass, keep your boat centered and relatively stable at anchor, and it works really well. Now, the next thing we added to that was the Mantis anchor snubber, which makes it even a little easier than having to tie knots and those kind of things. A few wraps around, lock in the carabiner, and you're good to go. Now that works really well, and that was kind of the next investment we made in the ground tackle, was making the bridle easier to set up and deploy whenever we actually set the anchor. Now, one of the things we learned early on is that it is a decent anchor. We came up on a storm. We were out on Lake Norman in the city of Huntersville, near the city of Huntersville on Lake Norman, a place called Cocktail Cove. We were going to anchor out there for a couple of days, enjoy some of the boats that come by, the lake itself, ride to lunch or dinner a couple of times, and just spend time relaxing on the lake. And we had anchored in for the night. We were all good to go. And one of those heavy thunderstorms that pop up in the middle of the summer, it popped up and we were caught up in it. And you'll see on the radar diagram where we were right in the middle of the storm, for building for probably an hour and then tailing off for probably an hour. Heavy rain, large waves on Lake Norman, and we were rocking and rolling. We were swaying a lot, and I spent pretty much that whole time sitting at the helm, watching the chart plotter, seeing if we were dragging anchor. And that whole time, in those high winds, those waves, and all that heavy rain, we didn't drag anchor at all. The anchor really held. And that really let me know that, hey, at least we've got a solid, decent anchor setup that we can use and will get us through a storm if necessary. Now, that works great, and that was all fine, but I really wanted a more robust anchor because some of the anchoring we do is out at the coast of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, where you have the intracoastal waterway with large tidal swings in places, a lot of water moving in and out of those inlets, and strong currents that happen because of that. In our old boat, our runabout, we anchored near an inlet in Holden Beach, North Carolina, and hardly could get the anchor up because the current had caused the boat to set the anchor so deep. I never thought we were going to get it up. I ended up having to cleat it off and power off with the actual engines to get the anchor to release, thinking I'd torn up the anchor, but we brought it up and the Danforth anchor was in good shape. But that was just a Danforth anchor in the sand clay mix that we have here in North Carolina. So I knew we wanted something a little more robust, a little heavier, a little stouter for the coastal Carolina regions. And I went on a research mission to figure out what the best answer to that question was and how I would make it work with the small bow roller that you have on the R-23. So at that point, we've got our processes down. We understand each other when we're anchoring, how we're going to do things. It's very important that you both have roles that you can complete when anchoring or bringing up the anchor. And we've got all that down pat. Now we're going to up the game with a better anchor system. And that system is going to require a new bow roller. And once you look at the bow roller options and those kind of things, I decided, based on both the drawings that are there and the verifications that I made, but also some reviews from other Ranger Tug owners, I decided to get the BR1 bow roller from Mantus. And that bow roller is a very robust bow roller that is almost ideal to fit right in with the bow roller that you have on the Ranger Tug R-23. So I didn't have to cut holes to take out the existing bow roller. I didn't have to do major work to fabricate anything. There are a couple metalworking steps and a couple of woodworking steps that I went through to fashion the pieces that were needed. But that's really the whole hardest part about installing this new bow roller. So what I had to do was remove the actual roller and hoop from the bow roller that came on the R-23. And then I could put the BR1 bow roller down and kind of figure out how I wanted to position it. And it lays pretty well right on top of the existing bow roller. And the only thing you have is the rear portion of the BR1 kind of hangs over the deck about an inch above the deck while sitting on the front on the existing bow roller. And so what you need to do is fabricate some blocks. And I wanted to get blocks that weren't going to deteriorate or break up over time. So I went to the hardware store, I got some PVC trim and used that to sandwich two pieces of that together to create a block to go under the base of the BR1 and connect that solidly to the deck. The next step, after getting that fashioned and rounding the corners and doing all the kind of things, you can spend the time doing that or you don't have to. The hardest part is getting the angle the way you want it and kind of forming the top part so that the BR1 sits flat, connects to the front bow roller. And then what I did is I took off maybe an eighth of an inch of part of the front bow roller just to catch the edge of the BR1's base plate and make it sit right in place. And at that point, you've got a larger, more robust bow roller that's ready to be set into the deck. Now, I did have to add two new holes to the base of the bow roller to make that fit the size of the deck and the location of the holes. That was relatively easy. A couple minutes on the drill press, no problem. And then you could mount that through the block, through the deck with through bolts. I actually used a part of the stainless steel plate that was chain marring protection on the original deck. As I took that off to put the blocks in, I actually used that as the backing plate for the bolts for the bow roller that I installed. So I now have a bow roller that's bolted to the deck. And the only other thing I wanted to do was securely lock it down to the existing bow roller, make those two one unit so that I now have four bolts on the deck and three bolts on the foredeck to secure the entire bow roller into place. So those bolts go through the existing bow roller. Had to drill a few holes to get those bolts to go through, and locked everything together on the front. And now I have an installed new bow roller that's very robust, very solid, has 7 bolts holding it in place, and it to do two different parts of the deck. And I love this configuration.
All right, so now we're outside with the anchor, and you'll notice the boat is filthy. We actually anchored out on Sunday afternoon, and anchor came up super muddy, but we didn't have our washdown pump out because we have that winterized, and I didn't want to just do it for the afternoon. So she's dirty, but that means we use the anchor. We don't just talk about it. So let's talk about what we've done in the journey to getting to our complete anchor kit that I'll describe. We talked about first the chafe guard on the fiberglass. That worked really well. And then if you want to look at the complete system now that we've put together, we have the BR1 Mantis bow roller, the Mantis 25-pound M2 anchor, the swivel from Mantis with the swivel shackle, both locked in with safety wire. We have the factory chain, the factory windlass, factory rode, and all of this, in addition to the bow stop was part of the Mantis design that I had. And then once that I was done, I also added a tensioner. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So the Mantis Bow Roller is mounted with 4 bolts. In this design, you actually have to move 2 of the bolts back and create those holes. But those 4 bolts go through the anchor windlass plate that's over the anchor locker. I love the fact that Ranger Tug gave us a good amount of space between the windlass and the original anchor roller. And what I did is I took about half that space, consumed that with the new bow roller that's installed on top of a wedge that I created from some PVC, a standard PVC board that I got at the hardware store. And then I shaped it and sanded it down into a wedge shape with 2 stacked. I also notched the original bow roller out so that the front lip here would fit right against that notch, give it a little more support. But what I have now, without removing the factory bow roller, is a bow roller that's now longer, more designed for a larger anchor, and is bolted down with actually 7 bolts through the deck. I've got the 4 on the BR1. I've got the 3 original from the original bow roller on which this is sitting. And also I've bolted the bow roller from Mantus to the original bow roller. So it's all one complete system now, very solid. And honestly, I don't mind anchoring out for lunch for some time in the afternoon on a relatively calm day and not even putting out any additional ropes or cleaning off the anchor. I can just let it sit with the windlass and that tension holding us at anchor. But all of this has done very well. You got to have a swivel, and this Mantis swivel is awesome. It's robust. It's beefy. We used it with our original anchor for a long time. The original anchor couldn't use the Mantis swivel. We had to buy a new one that would actually fit the original anchor. But this swivel is awesome. The anchor sets almost immediately. We've had very little issue getting this to set, and it holds tight. When we bring it up, the mud comes off really easily. The bow roller itself moves my bow roller out about 3 inches, but also gives me a second roller on there. But the 3 inches that it moves it out gives me room to have the M2 anchor, the 25-pound, without any risk of bringing that anchor up and hitting the hole. And then to top it all off, I hate having this thing bouncing around, while we're towing, while we're underway especially. So the one last thing that I added was this tensioner. And the way it works is there's a safety pin, there's a latch here, a lever that rotates a cam and allows me to pull the anchor up, unlatch the little link that I've got here, and then I can deploy the anchor without any hassle. And then when I want to tighten up the anchor, see how it's moving around even with the winch. All I do is rotate the cam forward, engage the link, shift that back. Then I can loosen up the windlass, have plenty of excess tension off of the chain, and the anchor itself is still tight. It'll wiggle side to side, but it's tight up against the anchor stop, and it's pulled tight onto the bow roller. And I just really like the way that this setup has been working. It's been trouble-free, and I'm glad we have Elvin Ray back so we can spend some more time on it. In fact, next week we hope to get to the ocean or to the coast and spend some time anchored out after Christmas. So this is the anchor setup that we ended up with. If you have questions, any comments, leave those below. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video, which is going to be pretty cool. We've got some power management stuff coming, including Life 04, so keep an eye out for that. See you.